Before we dive into this story, I want to invite you to join our family. Hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, share this with someone who loves a good mystery, and drop a comment below telling me what you think happens next. Your support keeps these stories alive. Now, let's begin. She had been taught that powerful men craved silence the way desert travelers craved water. Amara Nwosu learned this lesson early, watching her mother navigate her father's moods with the precision of a tightrope walker. So when the matchmaker arrived at their estate in Lagos with news that Adebayo Okonkwo, had requested her hand, Amara understood the assignment. Be graceful. Be quiet. Be the kind of woman who could sit through a 7-course dinner without disrupting the symphony of silverware on china. Adebayo had built his fortune the hard way, clawing up from a childhood in Enugu where electricity was a luxury and running water was a prayer answered on Sundays. By 38, he owned the largest telecommunications network in West Africa, 3 luxury hotels, and enough political influence to make presidents return his calls within the hour. His headquarters in Victoria Island rose 42 stories into the Lagos sky, all glass and steel, and the kind of quiet that made interns whisper in the elevators. He liked it that way. Control was his native language. Chaos was the enemy at the gate. The courtship lasted exactly 3 months. Adebayo's assistant scheduled their dates with the efficiency of board meetings. Dinner at the Ocean View, quiet corner, minimal staff. A gallery opening where they spoke in murmurs about abstract art neither particularly understood. A weekend at his estate in Abuja where the silence was so complete Amara could hear her own heartbeat. He proposed on a Tuesday, presenting a ring that cost more than most people's houses, and Amara said yes, because that's what quiet women do when loud men ask them questions. Besides, she told herself, she had her own reasons for saying yes. Reasons she couldn't speak aloud. Not yet. The wedding was set for a Saturday in March when the Harmattan winds had finally retreated and Lagos remembered how to breathe. Adebayo's event coordinator transformed the grounds of his Ikoyi mansion into something out of a fever dream. White roses imported from Ecuador, a 16-piece orchestra, and enough security to guard a small nation. The guest list read like a who's who of African power: CEOs, ministers, traditional rulers wearing coral beads worth fortunes, and enough cameras to broadcast the event across 3 continents. This wasn't just a wedding. It was a statement. Adebayo Okonkwo, the man who controlled the narrative, was finally writing his own happy ending. The morning arrived perfect and terrible. The sky stretched blue and cloudless. The orchestra tuned their instruments. Guests filled the garden in their finest asoebi, the women's geli head wraps rising like crowns, the men's agbada flowing like robes of state. Adebayo stood at the altar in a cream suit that probably cost more than a car, his best man beside him making nervous jokes that died in the heavy air of expectation. Everything was perfect. Everything was controlled. Everything was about to detonate. The limousine arrived 17 minutes late. Adebayo's jaw tightened. Lateness was disorder, and disorder was unacceptable. But then the door opened and Amara emerged in a gown that made the crowd gasp. Ivory lace and crystal beadwork, a cathedral train that caught the light like water. She was perfect. She was exactly what he'd ordered. And then the world tilted sideways because behind her, climbing out of the car with the confidence of someone who owned the moment, was a little girl. She couldn't have been more than 5. Her hair was braided in intricate patterns that must have taken hours, decorated with tiny gold beads that caught the sun. Her dress matched Amara's, scaled down to child-size perfection. She held Amara's hand with one small fist and clutched a bouquet of miniature roses with the other. No one had mentioned a flower girl. No one had mentioned a child at all. The murmurs started immediately, rolling through the crowd like wind through tall grass. Adebayo's brain tried to process what his eyes were seeing. A mistake. Had to be. Some niece. Some cousin's child. But then the little girl looked up, locked eyes with him across 50 feet of rose petals and marble pathway, and her face exploded into the kind of joy that can't be faked. She released Amara's hand. She dropped the flowers. And she ran. Daddy. The word detonated in the silence like a grenade wrapped in innocence. She ran toward him with arms outstretched, her little shoes slapping against marble, her voice bright and certain and absolutely sure. The orchestra stopped mid-note. A woman in the 3rd row actually dropped her champagne flute. Adebayo's best man grabbed his elbow like he thought the groom might collapse. The cameras, oh God, the cameras zoomed in with the hunger of sharks smelling blood and water. Adebayo couldn't move, couldn't breathe. His mind raced through every possibility, every night, every woman, every moment of his carefully controlled life, trying to find the memory that matched this child. Nothing. He had no children. He'd been careful. He'd always been careful. This wasn't possible. But she was real. She was running toward him, and she was calling him daddy like she'd done it 1,000 times before. She reached him and threw her small arms around his legs with the force of absolute certainty. "I knew you'd be here," she said, looking up at him with eyes that held something ancient and knowing. "Mama said you'd be waiting." Adebayo looked past her to Amara, desperate for explanation, for context, for anything that made sense. What he saw made his blood go cold. Amara stood frozen at the end of the aisle, her face drained of color, her eyes wide with something that looked less like surprise and more like terror. Her sister Chinello appeared at her elbow, whispering urgently. Amara's mother pushed through the crowd, her face tight with an emotion Adebayo couldn't name. Then Amara did the unthinkable. She turned around. She gathered her cathedral train with shaking hands, climbed back into the limousine, and the door slammed shut. The engine roared. Tires squealed against marble. And just like that, his bride vanished, leaving behind only the ghost of expensive perfume and 500 witnesses to the most spectacular disaster in Lagos social history. The little girl looked up at him, confused now, her joy dimming. "Where's Mama going?" she asked. "Isn't this where we stay with you?" Adebayo stood there, a man who controlled empires, rendered absolutely powerless by a child whose name he didn't even know. The little girl's name was Zara. Adebayo learned this from his head of security, Emeka, who had to physically pry the child from his legs and carry her to a guest room while photographers captured every angle of the disaster. Within 20 minutes, the footage was trending across 3 continents. Within an hour, his phone had 17 missed calls from board members, 43 texts from concerned business partners, and 1 voicemail from his mother that simply said, "Come home." Now, he didn't go home. He went to Amara's family estate in Lekki, his motorcade cutting through traffic like a knife through silk. Her father met him at the gate with the expression of a man who'd just watched his daughter's life implode on national television. "She's not here," Ambassador Nwosu said, and something in his voice suggested he was telling the truth. "I haven't seen her since she left for the wedding. I don't know where she is." "Then tell me about the child," Adebayo said, his voice low and dangerous. "Tell me why a little girl I've never met knows my face well enough to call me daddy in front of 500 witnesses." The ambassador's face did something complicated. "Come inside," he said finally. "This conversation requires whiskey and closed doors." The study smelled like old books and older secrets. The ambassador poured 2 fingers of scotch into crystal tumblers and handed one to Adebayo before settling into a leather chair that had probably witnessed decades of difficult truths. "What do you know about your grandfather?" he asked. "What does my grandfather have to do with anything?" "Everything," the ambassador said quietly. 7 years ago, before you became the Adebayo Okonkwo who makes presidents nervous, your family came to mine with a proposal. Your grandfather and my father, they'd made an arrangement decades earlier. A promise between bloodlines. You were supposed to marry my eldest daughter, Chinello. It was decided before either of you could walk. Adebayo's hand tightened around his glass. "I chose Amara myself. No one arranged." "You chose exactly who you were meant to choose," the ambassador interrupted. "Amara was always the backup plan. When Chinello refused the arrangement and moved to London, the families simply shifted the target. Your business suddenly needed diplomatic connections. My daughter suddenly needed a husband. The matchmaker who came to you? She was paid by both our families to make it look like fate." The whiskey turned sour in Adebayo's mouth. "And the child? That," the ambassador said, "is where the story gets complicated. There's a council, the Circle of Echoes. Old families, old money, old magic. They've guided our bloodlines for generations, ensuring certain debts are paid, certain promises kept. Your grandfather borrowed heavily from them to build his first business. My father did the same to secure his ambassadorship. The price was always going to come due." "I don't believe in magic," Adebayo said flatly. "Neither did I," the ambassador replied. until Zara was born. She came into this world knowing things no child should know, speaking names of ancestors she'd never heard, drawing symbols from languages dead for centuries. The circle claimed her immediately, said she was the vessel, the bridge, the payment for everything our families had taken. They said when she turned 5, the debt would be called, and they said you would be the one to pay it. Adebayo stood abruptly, the chair scraping against hardwood. This is insane. You're telling me fairy tales while your daughter has vanished with a child. My daughter is protecting you both. The ambassador cut in, standing as well. She loves you, you fool. Enough to run rather than let you walk into what the circle has planned. Zara calling you daddy wasn't an accident. It was activation. The moment those words left her mouth in front of witnesses, you became bound to her, to the debt, to everything that comes next. Where are they? I don't know. Amara planned this alone. But if I had to guess, she'd go somewhere old. Somewhere the circle's reach hasn't fully extended. Maybe her grandmother's village in Enugu. Maybe the mission house in Calabar where she spent childhood summers. Maybe nowhere I could imagine because my daughter is smarter than all of us combined. Adebayo left the estate with more questions than answers and a rage that felt like swallowing broken glass. He activated every resource at his disposal. Private investigators, satellite tracking on Amara's credit cards, facial recognition software scanning airport cameras. Nothing. She'd vanished as completely as smoke and wind. But everywhere he searched, he found breadcrumbs of the story the ambassador had started. His grandfather's business records showed payments to something called the custodians. His own company's founding documents had clauses written in languages he didn't recognize. And in a safety deposit box his father had left him, Adebayo found a photograph that made his blood stop moving. It showed 2 men, young and strong, standing beside a woman in traditional priestess garb. One man was clearly his grandfather. The other was Amara's grandfather. Between them, the priestess held a staff carved with symbols that matched the one Zara had drawn in crayon on the guest room walls before the security team had taken her to child services. On the back of the photograph, in his grandfather's handwriting, the price is steep, but the future is secured. May our grandchildren forgive us. Adebayo flew to Enugu 3 days later. The village where his grandfather had been born was nothing like the gleaming towers of Lagos. Dirt roads, modest homes, children playing football with a ball held together by tape and prayer. The elders received him in a compound where chickens wandered freely and the air smelled like wood smoke and time moving slowly. They'd been expecting him. Your bride has not come here, the oldest woman said, her face a map of wrinkles that each told a story. But her spirit walks ahead of her. The child you seek is marked by old promises. You cannot run from what you inherited any more than a river can refuse to flow to the ocean. I'm not here for riddles, Adebayo said, exhaustion making him sharp. I'm here for my wife. She was never truly yours, another elder said, not unkindly. She belongs to the space between what was promised and what must be. The circle will call for her when the time comes. They always do. Your grandfather knew this. He chose wealth over wisdom. Now you must choose whether to repeat his mistakes or write a different ending. Tell me how to find the circle. The elders exchanged glances. Finally, the oldest woman spoke. They find you, not the other way around. But if you wish to seek them, follow the water. Every river in this land knows their name. Start where 3 waters meet and wait. They will send a sign or they will send silence. Either way, you'll have your answer. Adebayo spent 2 weeks following that cryptic advice. 3 rivers converged near Onitsha, and he camped there like a madman, ignoring his assistant's increasingly frantic calls about board meetings and pending deals. On the 14th night, a woman appeared at his fire. She was neither old nor young, neither beautiful nor plain, just present in a way that made the air feel thicker. You're looking in all the wrong places, she said without preamble. Your bride doesn't want to be found, and the child is exactly where she needs to be. Who are you? Someone who remembers what your grandfather promised. Someone who knows what Amara is trying to prevent. Go home, Adebayo Okonkwo. Build your towers. Sign your contracts. Forget about debts written in blood and water. Some stories don't have happy endings. She left before he could respond, dissolving into darkness so completely he half believed he'd imagined her. But she'd left something behind, a small wooden carving of a child holding a man's hand. On its base, carved in tiny letters, 7 years. Then come to the place where silence lives. Adebayo returned to Lagos a different man. The billionaire who'd built empires on certainty now walked through his glass towers like a ghost haunting his own life. His assistant learned to schedule meetings around his long silences. His board members stopped asking about the wedding. The media eventually found fresher scandals to devour. But every night, Adebayo sat in his penthouse office with that wooden carving and counted down the years. 7 years. The woman had said 7 years. He never stopped searching. Private investigators became permanent fixtures on his payroll. He funded orphanages across West Africa, hoping one might give him information. He attended every traditional ceremony, every village gathering where old knowledge was still spoken aloud, always listening for whispers about the circle of echoes. Most people looked at him like he was crazy. Some looked at him with pity. A few looked at him with recognition and quickly looked away. In the second year, he found Chinelo in London. Amara's sister worked for an NGO and lived in a Brixton flat that smelled like Nigerian spices and English rain. She let him in reluctantly, made him tea he didn't drink, and finally spoke truth she'd been carrying like stones. Amara contacted me once, Chinelo said. 3 months after the wedding. She wouldn't say where she was, but she told me to tell you something if you came looking. She said, tell him I'm sorry. Tell him Zara is safe. Tell him the debt isn't what he thinks it is. What does that mean? I don't know, but I know my sister. She's not running from you, Adebayo. She's running towards something. Some finish line only she can see. She loved you. Maybe she still does. But she loves that little girl more, and she believes keeping both of you apart is the only way to keep you both alive. The circle wants the child dead? Chinelo's face did something complicated. The circle wants the child to fulfill her purpose. Whether she survives that purpose. Amara wasn't willing to risk finding out. So she took option 3, disappear completely, break the cycle, refuse to play the game. It's very her, actually. My sister never did like being told what to do. Adebayo left London with more fragments of the puzzle, but no complete picture. He started reading everything he could find about West African spiritual traditions, old contracts between families, the way power got transferred through bloodlines and promises. He learned that the Circle of Echoes wasn't just one organization, but a network of families who'd held power for centuries, predating colonialism, surviving it, adapting to modern times, while keeping ancient protocols alive. They were judges, priests, power brokers, memory keepers, and they never forgot a debt. In the 4th year, his mother finally told him her part of the story. She'd been avoiding him since the wedding, but cancer made her brave in ways health never had. From her hospital bed in Abuja, hooked to machines that beeped reassurance into the sterile air, she confessed. Your grandfather made a deal, she said, her voice weak but clear. He wanted success. The priestess told him success required sacrifice. Not money, something deeper. She said his grandson would father a child who would bridge 2 worlds, carry knowledge from the old times into the new. That child would either destroy our family or redeem it. Your grandfather thought he could control the outcome. He was wrong. They always are. Why didn't anyone tell me? Because we thought the debt had been canceled. Your father tried to buy it back, spent half his fortune negotiating with the circle. They took his money and told him the debt was transferred, not erased. Then he died in that car accident. Her voice broke. They said it was an accident. I've never believed them. Your father was too careful a driver. The road was too straight. The weather too clear. Adebayo felt something cold settle in his chest. They killed him. I don't know. But I know this. The circle doesn't release bloodlines easily. And Zara, that child is special in ways we can't understand. Amara knew it. That's why she ran. She's buying you time. Time to get stronger. Time to find another way. Time to maybe, just maybe, write a different ending than the one they've planned. His mother died 6 weeks later. Adebayo buried her next to his father and stood at the grave wondering how many generations of his family had died serving debts they didn't fully understand. The anger that had sustained him for 4 years began shifting into something else. Determination. Strategy. If the circle wanted to play games across generations, fine. He'd learn their rules and find the loopholes. Every system had weaknesses. Every ancient power had blind spots. He just needed to be patient enough to find them. In the 5th year, he met a historian named Professor Okafor who specialized in pre-colonial governance systems. Over palm wine in a university office crammed with books and artifacts, the professor explained how the circle operated. They're not evil, he said. That's the mistake people make. They're custodians. They hold knowledge, maintain balance, ensure certain traditions don't die. But they're also human. They make mistakes. They overreach. And sometimes, they forget that the people they're governing have agency too. How do I fight them? You don't fight them. You negotiate. You find what they want more than they want your compliance. Every contract has an out clause, even spiritual ones. The question is, what are you willing to trade? Anything. Even your empire? Even your name? Even your freedom? Adebayo didn't hesitate. Yes. The professor studied him for a long moment. Then you might actually stand a chance. Most men would choose power over love. The circle counts on that. It's how they've survived so long. But a man willing to sacrifice everything? That's unpredictable. That's dangerous. That might be exactly what breaks their hold. In the 6th year, Adebayo quietly began dismantling parts of his empire. He sold off hotels, transferred assets, restructured companies. His board thought he was having a breakdown. His competitors circled like sharks sensing blood. But he was building something else, a foundation that couldn't be touched by the circle's influence. He funded schools in remote villages, built medical clinics, created scholarships for children who showed signs of unusual gifts. If the circle wanted a child who bridged worlds, he'd create a world worth bridging to. And every night, he held that wooden carving and whispered to it like prayer. Hold on, Zara. Hold on, Amara. I'm coming. Just hold on a little longer. 7 years. The woman had said 7 years. Adebayo marked the anniversary of his destroyed wedding by sitting in his office and remembering the feel of a small girl's arms around his legs, the sound of her voice calling him daddy, the look of terror on Amara's face before she vanished. Then he opened his laptop and searched, one more time, for the place where silence lives. It took 3 more months, but he found it. A monastery in the hills outside Calabar. Ancient, remote, known locally as the place where women went when the world became too loud. No phones, no internet, just prayer and work and silence that wrapped around the soul like bandages around wounds. The kind of place where someone could hide for 7 years. The kind of place where a little girl could grow up protected from prophecies and debts and the hunger of old powers wanting to consume her light. Adebayo booked a flight. He was going to find his family. And this time, he wasn't leaving without them. The monastery sat on a hillside where the earth remembered older names for God. Adebayo's driver refused to go beyond the village at the base of the mountain, crossing himself 3 times and muttering prayers in Efik about places where spirits walked too close to the living. So Adebayo walked. 3 hours up a path that wound through cassava farms and palm groves, past women carrying water on their heads who looked at him with knowing eyes, past children who stopped their games to watch the stranger in expensive shoes climb toward the place where silence lived. The gates were simple wood, nothing like the ornate barriers that protected his Lagos mansion. A nun answered his knock, young, serene, her face holding the kind of peace that comes from years of chosen stillness. "We don't accept visitors without advance notice," she said in accented English. "I'm looking for my wife," Adebayo said. "Amara Nwosu. And my daughter. She'd be 12 now. Her name is Zara." Something flickered across the nun's face. Not surprise exactly. More like recognition of a moment she'd been expecting. "Wait here," she said, and disappeared behind the gates. 20 minutes felt like 20 years. Adebayo stood there listening to birds call to each other across the valley, smelling wood smoke and the peculiar sweetness of flowers whose names he didn't know. His phone had no signal up here. His empire felt like something that belonged to another man in another lifetime. All that remained was the echo of a 5-year-old's voice calling him daddy, and 7 years of searching condensed into this single moment of waiting. The nun returned. "Mother Superior will see you," she said. "But you must understand, the women here have come seeking refuge. If you bring chaos into this place, you will be removed. Forcibly if necessary. Do you understand?" "I understand. I just want to see them. I just want to know they're safe." She led him through gardens where vegetables grew in careful rows, and a fountain murmured constant prayers. The main building was old stone, probably built by Portuguese missionaries centuries ago, worn smooth by time and weather and the hands of countless women seeking sanctuary. Mother Superior received him in an office that smelled like beeswax and old books. She was ancient, her face a landscape of wisdom and weariness. "Mr. Okonkwo," she said, "you're persistent. I'll grant you that. They're here. They've been here for 7 years. Working, praying, healing. Your wife tends our garden. Your daughter, well, she's remarkable. Brilliant mind, kind heart, old soul. She speaks 6 languages now and can quote scripture in 4 of them. She also knows things she shouldn't know, sees things we don't see. The kind of child who makes even old nuns feel young and foolish." Adebayo's throat tightened. "Can I see them?" "That depends. Why are you here?" "Because they're my family. Because I've spent 7 years trying to understand what happened. Because I'm ready to face whatever the circle wants from us together. Not separated. Not hiding. Together." Mother Superior studied him with eyes that had probably heard every variation of human desperation. "Your wife believed separation was protection. She thought if she kept the child away from you, away from your world, the prophecy would become void. No union, no bridge, no debt fulfilled. She's been wrong about many things, but her love has been pure. Can you say the same?" "I love them both," Adebayo said. "Even though I barely knew Amara before the wedding. Even though Zara isn't biologically mine. I've loved them both for 7 years. That has to count for something. Love always counts," Mother Superior said softly. "Even when it's inconvenient for ancient powers with ancient plans. Wait here." She left through a side door, and Adebayo heard her footsteps echoing down stone corridors. His hands shook. He pressed them flat against his thighs and tried to breathe like a normal human being instead of a man whose entire existence had been building toward this moment. They came in together, hand in hand the way they'd arrived at his wedding 7 years ago. But everything else had changed. Amara was thinner, her beauty now carved rather than soft, her eyes holding depths they hadn't held before. She wore simple clothes, her hair covered by a headscarf, no jewelry, no makeup. Just her essential self standing in afternoon light filtering through old windows. And Zara. God, Zara. She was 12 now, all legs and angles, her child roundness giving way to the woman she'd become. She wore the monastery school uniform, white shirt, blue skirt, sensible shoes. Her hair was braided close to her scalp, but her eyes, those eyes still held galaxies, still knew things they shouldn't know. And when she saw him, they filled with tears. "Daddy," she whispered. Not a shout this time, not a proclamation, just a whisper carrying 7 years of absence like a prayer finally answered. Adebayo crossed the room in 3 strides and dropped to his knees so they could be eye level. "Zara," he said, and his voice broke on her name. "I've been looking for you. I never stopped looking for you." She threw her arms around his neck, and he held her, this child who'd called him father before he understood what that meant. This girl who'd been hidden away to protect them both from destinies written before either was born. She smelled like monastery soap and sunshine and something indefinably her. "I knew you'd come," she said against his shoulder. "Mama said you might not. She said you might forget. But I knew. I've been counting days." Over her head, Adebayo looked at Amara. She stood frozen, tears streaming down her face, her hands covering her mouth like she was trying to hold back sounds too big for the silence around them. "I'm sorry," she said when she could speak. "I'm so sorry. I thought I was protecting you. I thought if I kept her away." "It's okay," Adebayo said, and meant it. "You did what you thought was right. You kept her safe. You bought us time. Now we face whatever comes next together. All 3 of us. No more running. No more hiding. Whatever the circle wants, they'll have to go through all of us to get it." Amara moved then, falling to her knees beside them, and suddenly they were a knot of 3 people holding each other like shipwreck survivors clinging to the same piece of driftwood. Zara pulled back enough to look at both their faces. "The circle is already here," she said calmly. "They arrived this morning. Mother Superior has been keeping them in the chapel. They said they'd wait until sunset. They said you'd come today. They said the 7 years were always leading to this moment." Adebayo looked at Amara. She nodded, fear and resignation mixing in her expression. "She's right. We can't run anymore. The debt comes due at sunset. We have maybe 2 hours. Then we have 2 hours to figure out how to rewrite an ending that was written before we were born," Adebayo said. He stood, helping them both to their feet, keeping Zara's hand firmly in his. "Take me to them. Let's finish this." They walked to the chapel together, billionaire, bride, and bridge between worlds. The circle sat in pews like judges awaiting verdict, 7 elders representing 7 bloodlines of power. But Adebayo had learned something in 7 years of searching. Ancient powers survive by making people believe they're inevitable. The moment you stop believing, the moment you choose love over fear, contracts written in blood begin to dissolve like morning mist. The negotiation lasted until dawn. What Adebayo offered wasn't his wealth or his daughter or his compliance. He offered something the circle needed more, a new story. A bridge that chose its own purpose. A child who'd grow into her power freely, not forced. In the end, prophecies are just stories we tell about the future. And stories can be rewritten by people brave enough to hold hands and refuse to let go. The lesson? You've got this. Whatever ancient debts you think you carry, whatever promises made before you were born, you have agency. Love rewrites destiny. Sacrifice transforms curses into blessings. And family, however it's formed, is worth 7 years of searching. It's worth everything. Thank you for joining this journey. If this story touched you, hit that like button, subscribe for more tales that matter, share this with someone who needs to hear it, and comment below with your thoughts. What would you have done in Adebayo's place? Your engagement keeps these stories alive. Until next time, remember, you're braver than you know, and your story isn't finished yet.